Okay, great. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Jean-Philippe Marelli. As Ken was mentioning, I'm a master beekeeper in the master beekeeper program and journey level, and also started my already working on my capstone because I figured it could take more than just a year to do it, so I might as well start today. And want also to mention that today is World Environmental Day, so Environment Day. So I'm happy to be able to contribute a little bit on that day and present to you about my project on stingless bees. So it's not moving. Just see. Okay. So how did I get into bees? So I'm actually a doctor in plant pathology. So I also worked pretty much all my career with Mars, the chocolate company, and I specialize in cocoa diseases, right? So I basically take care of, make sure that we find solutions for our supply chain. And so I work on different projects related to different pests, different viruses, different pathogens that affect the crop of our favorite treat, which is chocolate. So, so I would say it's a passion. I really love my job. I don't feel like I'm working, and I just came back actually from a trip to the two top world producers, which are Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana in West Africa. So a little bit of jet lag, so excuse me if I'm a little bit hesitant when I speak, but I just came back yesterday. So, but it was really inspiring trip as well, and I hadn't been there for a while due to the whole lockdown. So really happy to be able to be back. And so how did I get into this? So basically during the pandemic, talking about lockdowns, I was basically locked down in Brazil. I was in a farm, which is our family farm, and bees for me were a way to get away in a way from the computer and to do something else, and also to learn. So I started learning about beekeeping. I started learning about bees, and I learned that I was actually surrounded by a different type of bee, which are stingless bees. And Brazil actually is the country where there's the most stingless bee diversity. So I was really interested in this. And of course, I was also interested in regular honeybees, and that's the reason why I joined the program, the camp. And it was interesting also that my first two exams were actually done all virtual, with Wendy in California, and me with my beehive in Brazil. So it was also an interesting experience to be able to do the exams this way. But so you see me there with in my what we call meliponari, which is basically the stingless bee apiary. And it's an interesting picture there on the right, because I'm combining my two passions. I'm giving a lecture on cacao within my stingless bees, and on the back my cacao trees. So I'm really blessed to have two passions, and these are the two, right? Bees and cacao and honey. Sweet things. So so now diving a little bit more about what are stingless bees. So we have the subfamily of the cubiculate bees, right? And within the subfamily, we have different tribes, right? And we have the Euglossini, which are the orchid bees. We have the Bombini, which are the bumblebees. And then we have the Apini, which where the honeybees belong. And a tribe that not many people know, but we have the Meliponini, right? Which are the stingless bees. And these are eusocial bees as well. And they produce honey, although in much less quantity than the honeybees. And within these Meliponini, we have two big sort of subgroups as well. We have the Meliponas, which are usually bigger bees. They can be even a little bit bigger than honeybees. And then we have the trigonas, which are smaller, and they can actually be as small as a small mosquito, and as big as maybe a fly. So within all the 20,000 species of bees, we have 500 of those that are Meliponini, that belong to the Meliponini, and around 512 to be precise. And Brazil, as I said, had about 300 species of those stingless bees. So what is different between stingless bees and honeybees? So we'll see a little bit of the main differences between their biology, but of course, the most obvious one comes from the name. They don't sting, right? So they lose their ability to sting. And this is, there's different hypotheses and theories why. I mean, that we know that they're actually a little bit more, they evolved earlier than honeybees. But one reason that we think is because their colonies are much smaller. They're about 4,000 individuals. And they would have to sacrifice a lot of workers to defend their beehive if they sting, right? Because of course bees die when they sting. So instead of actually sacrificing their workers, they develop different ways, and one way for them is to bite. So they have bigger mandibles, and they actually will bite their enemies, but which doesn't necessarily end up in a death, right? So they can defend their colonies, they're smaller, and they don't necessarily die out of an attack. So that's one of the theories why they lost their sting. They still have a very vestigial stinger, but they don't, of course, they don't use it, right? But so stingless is not necessarily the right word, right? Because they still have a little bit of that left. So around the distribution, so they only occur in the subtropics, right? So South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. And so they're very located in between those different tropical latitudes. There's one exception, right? And we will see that later in my talk. There is only one place where you can find stingless bees in the Northern Hemisphere, and that's actually very close to us. It's in Palo Alto in California. So that's a a lot of serendipity that I happen to be in Davis, that I love stingless bees, and actually have one species of stingless bees right near me. So very, very happy about that too, very blessed as well. So I could say a lot about the diversity of those 512 species, but I'm just going to mention one, which is the nest entrance. So these are very bees that have like a lot of interest in decorating their nest entrance. And it's of course the interest, but also functional, right? So for example, the first picture is Tetragonisca angustula, which is also called jatai. So they have this little tube that they form with wax. And interestingly, this bee actually closes the nest entrance at night. So they will actually go and put a little bit of more wax on the top and then close it so that enemies don't go at night. It's very interesting to see how they close it up at night and how they open it up when they wake up in the morning. And the second one is Melipona monduri, which is the species I work with, which is also called yellow urusu. So you see how they decorate the entrance, and of course, this is a way for them to recognize where to go back, right? So they do that with geopropolis, which is a mixture of soil and propolis, and they have this very nice entrance shape there. The third one is Captotrigona bipunctada, which is also another stingless bee. So you see how they have this trumpet-like entrance, and a lot of bees are there showing to defend and to be on the guard. And then the last one actually is entries one, which is the Portamona. This one actually is so bees, stingless bees can also make their whole nest outside of tree cavities. And certain species of bees do that. So this one actually makes it with mud, and sometimes even with animal feces. And they actually will make this big nest and just they don't basically need a tree to have a nest. So this is another type of stingless bees. So now, since we're in the California Master Beekeeper Program, and most of you actually work with honeybees, I wanted to give you a little bit of a comparison between the two. So the first thing that we're going to see is the brood. So you see how the brood of the honeybees is actually vertical. Well, the brood of the stingless bees is horizontal, and it's actually made in discs. It's not in frames. So even if there's no frames in stingless bees, but they don't actually do this kind of square and vertical brood, right? The other big difference is that they actually close their brood right away, as opposed to honeybees that will have half of the cycle of the larvae will be open brood. Stingless bees will be, they will basically, the workers will close it up. right away after the queen lay. And we'll see an example of that. And the other difference too is the type of wax. Basically, the wax that stingless bees produce is also produced by their body, but they also mix it with propolis, and that's why it's more brownish. So it's a mixture of propolis and wax, and we actually call it cerumen. It's not called wax. The other, so here you actually see the big difference between the wax of honeybees and stingless bees and the color, right? That young wax is, even for stingless bees, the very freshly made wax is still going to be brown as opposed to honeybees. So now in terms of the storage, right? So here you see on the left, you see the honeybee. This is one of my first swarms that I captured in the wild. So you can see how they were building already, and you can see the pollen stored and then a little bit of honey at the top. Well, that's not the case for stingless bees. They actually store their pollen and their honey into little pots. So that's sometimes they're called pot honey, because so I mean I don't really know why they do that, but it's a different way of basically storing. So maybe one reason that, if you wanted to explain why, is as the honey actually is not dehydrated as the honey from honeybees. The honey is actually fermented, right? So that's why these little pots actually they could be assimilated to little jars where the honey is actually going through the process of fermentation. And of course, the pollen is also fermented, but that's also the case for honeybees, where there's the bee bread. So you see how these pots are surrounding actually the nest or the brood, and that's where they take all these elements of pollen and honey to actually make the larval diet or the larval food. You see a glass there in the hive, and that's because that's how we feed the bees. So basically, when we do a split or when there's not enough resources outside, we put a little of the sugar water into that little glass, and that's where they come and feed and feed themselves, or we feed them. So another comparison is the type of caste. So of course, so Wendy explained to me that now we're not talking about 3 castes, but 2. So we have the females, which are the queen and the workers, and then we have the males, which is the drone. So for stingless bees, it's kind of the same thing. So you have the workers, which are the females. You have the queen. One difference is that the physogastry of the queen in stingless bees is very, very visible. So there's no need to mark the queen because she's very different from the other bees. And then you have the male, which is a little smaller. And you can see the main difference between the male and the female. They're actually difficult to take apart. But if you look at the heads, it's very clear that the male actually doesn't have as big as the mandibles because they don't actually defend, right? So they just feed and mate. Whereas the workers will actually be, defending the nest. And the antennae are actually also different. They have more like an L-shaped, and their eyes tend to be, I don't think they're bigger. I mean, at least I don't see, some people say they're bigger, so maybe they are, but it seems like they're not as big as a difference between the eyes of workers and drones as there is in honeybees. So, then life cycle, right? So honeybees, you all know that. So there is a life cycle of about 21 days for a worker. Half of that cycle is open brood, the other half is closed brood. So you see that on the right, you see for stingless bees, it's actually almost a double of that. So it's 40 to 52 days from egg to adult. And then as I was saying, the egg actually gets all the larval diet from the beginning. That's what we call mass provisioning. So this mass provisioning happens, and then the egg is laid by the queen, and then the egg will actually feed on that larval diet for the whole life cycle until it becomes an adult. And then what happens is that when the brood starts to show adults that want to emerge, the bees will come and scratch the surface of the wax, and that will help the adult to actually go exit the cell. So that's why you see a big difference in the coloration of the young brood, what we call green brood, and the more mature brood. And I'll show you that as well. So now we were talking about workers laying eggs, right? So I want to show you a little video, and I hope, well, even if the sound doesn't appear for you, it's okay, because it's just a video. So here you will see a queen that is basically waiting for the workers to do the mass provisioning, and then she will lay her egg. But I want you to see what happens in between. So, and this is an accelerated form. So this is a video that I took with an iPhone. And you can see the workers there doing the mass provisioning. So they're basically speeding the larval diet inside the cell. And you see the cell filling up, and the queen sort of waiting, right? And she's waiting to see what's, when it's going to be ready for me to to be able to do it. So they're very busy at it. And you see, so this is a mixture of honey and pollen, of course, that they're prepared especially for the larvae. And so what you're going to see at one point is a very interesting phenomenon that we call trophic egg. So what happens is that one of the workers is actually going to lay an egg. So you see the worker laying an egg there, right? In that egg, the queen is going to eat it, right? Because she doesn't necessarily want this to become a male or a drone. And also because it's nutrition for her, right? So she gets protein on top of the other things that she gets fed on. Now she's going to lay her egg there. And so you should see the egg now. Here you go. This is a real egg. It's a little bit bigger and wider. And so now the worker doesn't wait. She's going to go there and close the cell. And they do that by putting some of the wax they have on their body, and also the wax mixed with the propolis. And she's going to go and close it up. And again, this is accelerated. It's normally takes a little longer than that, but you will see that cell closing up there. So you see, it's very precise, and the others are kind of coming and checking as well, because everything is done until it's totally closed. And here you go. It's almost done. Just finishing up the work. And here you go. She finishes that. The other ones are checking everything's okay. So it's all done. And this actually happens. Almost 100 times a day. So the queen lays about 100 eggs a day. So this is what happens there. So we're talking about how stingless bees deal with worker eggs. Well, that's what they do. They eat it. Oops. Okay, so of course we can't talk about bees without talking about their role, right? And their role, the role of stingless bees is exactly the same as honeybees. They pollinate, but they have they're very specialized into forestries and also into some special flowers, like for example, the myrtaceae, that are a lot of them in the tropics, like for example, jabuticaba, that you probably know, guava, the pineapple guava as well, that you can find here in California. And they also like this other tapirira, which is a forest tree. It's one of these species that grows very fast, and they love the flowers. And this is a very good sources of nectar. So a lot of the honey actually comes from these species as well. And the pollination, I have also a little video. So you see how they have this buzz pollination, where they just squeeze the pollen against their body. And that's how basically they manage to pollinate the different trees and shrubs. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit more about the species I deal with. So this is because having 500 different species of stingless bees means that you have basically 500 different ways of beekeeping, right? So and this is one of the problems, is that there's not really one way of keeping stingless bees. Each species have their own sort of size of the hive. They have their own way of doing things, and so it's very important to specialize in one species, I would say, because then you kind of know exactly what to do. So that's what I did. I do have a few hives of other species, but I do that more for conservation purposes. But the species I really work with and produce honey from and other things is the Melipona monderi, which is mainly found in this, you see on the map, it's mainly found in the states around the coast. So Bahia, Minas Gerais, Paraná, the south of Brazil. So it's a bee that is very specialized in all the Atlantic forest trees. So that's where the biome is. And one thing that we have in Brazil is we have a lot of people actually, because it's a big country, so it's almost a continent, but we have a lot of people wanting to have bees of certain species in other states. And that's really been a discussion because there's some people that are against it, and there's some people that want that because they want more freedom in terms of being able to grow their own bees. But we know that bees are very specialized to their own environments and to their own plants. So bees, like for example, if you took Melipona monderi into the Amazon, they wouldn't be very happy, right? They would miss some of those species that they found in the Atlantic forest. So this is a discussion that's been happening in Brazil as well. So how now talking a bit more about this specific species. So the beehive is so you see here the size. So you see me here dealing with the beehive. So you have here two levels. So one is the brood nest, and the other one is the another brood nest. So basically you have two because then you can split them when one is totally full. You can just put one on top of the another empty one, and then you get a split. You get a new beehive. And so normally on top of that you can put a honey super, which is basically half of that depth there. And then you can get all the honey produced in that super. So you see here when you open the brood, what do you see? You see normally the brood, but it's all normally covered. So they like to cover that with this involucrum, what we call involucrum, which is basically a layer of wax that provides the temperature control and the protection of the brood. And then if you want to inspect the brood, then you have to sort of delicately remove that layer of wax, and you can see now the green brood, which is basically more brownish because it has more propolis, more wax. And then when the mature brood is ready, you see that it's more yellow, so it has less of the wax, and so that the bees can go out. And then you see the honey that is surrounding the nest, and that's usually the honey that we leave for the bees because they need that for their brood. And when there is a honey super, then they will make additional honey, some extras. That's where we can actually harvest. So talking about harvests, I wanted to show you a little bit of my daily routine when I'm there, and I can actually have a chance to harvest a little bit of the honey. So I'll show you how it happens. So I normally open the brood, so the box, there is this transparent layer that we put there for protection. And here you have a nest that's very, where I didn't actually remove the propolis. So you see a lot of the geopropolis surrounding that nest, and now I'm harvesting. So the harvest happens with the syringe. So one thing is that these bees only produce about maximum 4 pounds a year. So it's 4 to 6 pounds. So it's very little production, right? But this honey is very, very special as well. So that's why it's still worth to have a few hives so that you can actually have a good production of that honey. And you see how liquid it is. So as opposed to honeybees, stingless bees will actually don't dehydrate the honey. So the honey is about 30% humidity. And as I was saying, it's a different strategy, right? The honeybees will dehydrate their honey to preserve it so that there's no microorganisms growing or anything like that. Stingless bees will actually not dehydrate it because I think it would take them too much energy to dehydrate it when the environment is actually 90% humidity. So instead, they actually made a deal with the bacteria and the yeast and say, hey, instead of spoiling my honey, why don't you help me preserve it? And so they actually ferment that honey. And what's interesting is that because the pots are made of this propolis and wax mixture, the propolis actually will infuse into the honey and will provide some of that antimicrobial protection as well. So it's not like the yeast and the bacteria can do whatever they want and then just ferment everything, right? No, there's a balance between the antimicrobial activity and the fermentation, which makes it at one point, a stabilized honey. So very interesting. So there's, as you could see, there's other things that you can produce from the hive. So you can produce the geopropolis. So that geopropolis, I harvest that normally, and then I made my tincture. So I have to grind it first because it's very hard. It's mixed with soil. So I have to grind it to a fine powder, and then I mix it with ethanol, and I make my tincture. And I can tell you, I mean, if I'm, for example, I traveled, I did a lot of plane rides during the past 2 weeks. I always had my propolis in my pocket, and that kind of saved me because I could feel how I could get sick if I didn't have my propolis with me. So it's very efficient for that. You can also produce wax. So wax for making, you can make candles, you can make soap, you can make a lot of things with the cerumen. Also very, very antimicrobial because it has the propolis in there. And you can also harvest the pollen. It's a little bit less common to find pollen because, I mean, there's not much. I mean, there's, you really need to find the pots where they store the pollen. But I've seen people selling the pollen as well, and they need to also dry it because it's very humid. So you can also do that. So meliponiculture is basically the science or art of keeping stingless bees. And in my case, I really do it because I mean, they're passionate little creatures, but also because I strongly believe they're a way to also educate. And so I've done a few projects in schools in Brazil where I go to teach children about bees and about the importance they have for the environment. And because they're stingless and you don't need to wear any equipment, it's very, very easy to do with children. And that's kind of what I expect that I can, and I hope I can do in Palo Alto when we'll be able to have those little stingless bees in beehives. And of course, their honey is very, very special. As I said, they don't produce much, but their honey has actually a lot of properties because of the different flowers they pollinate and they go to, and because also of the flavors, and we'll see a little bit more about that in a few minutes about some of the chemical properties and medicinal properties. But meliponiculture is not something new, right? This is something that was actually been done for millennia, and that was actually done first by the Mayans. The Mayans, so you can see here some of the sculptures, the scriptures of the Mayans. You can see a Mayan, this is a Mayan god representing bees. And he's actually holding a beehive with the, with the circular brood there. And so they actually think that the pyramids, because, it looks like a pyramid. So they think that the Mayans were inspired by the shape of their beehives to actually build the pyramids, which is also very interesting. So the Mayans actually have done it for millennia. And there is actually this documentary that I recommend that you look at. It's called Mayaland Listening to the Bees. And it explains, that strong association between the Mayans and bees, and also the whole problem that they have right now in Mexico with all the pesticides and the agriculture, and how those Mayans are actually losing their bees due to these environmental concerns. So very good watch as well. And there's also another article that if you wanted to know more about stingless bees and their honey, there's a Nat Geo issue, April 1st, 2022. And actually that was the first time that I heard about the word miracle liquid. So maybe talking about the honey. And really, it is a miracle liquid in terms of all the properties and all the things that the honey can do. So also a good read if you wanted to get more information. So talking about the honey, right? So of course, there's a lot of the folk medicine, a lot of the beliefs and strong sort of anthropological things around the honey, but there's also science behind it, right? So, and recently there is a discovery that was done by a couple of scientists from University of Queensland, Natasha Hungerford and Mary Fletcher. And they discovered actually the stingless bee honey. They analyzed different honeys from different parts of the world, Brazil, Australia, etc. And they discovered that the honey was very, very rich. So the main sugar in stingless bee honey was actually trehalulose. And trehalulose is common sugar in plants, and also it's also a common sugar in a few whiteflies. But nobody knew that actually was common in bees, and particularly stingless bees. And you can see it. So trehalulose is actually also a disaccharide made of glucose and fructose, but the bond there is a glycosidic bond that actually makes it harder to break. So what happens is that when we ingest stingless bee honey, it goes into our small intestine, and it actually takes longer to release the fructose and sucrose. So that means that our glycemic index doesn't just jump right away. So it's actually very, very good for diabetics, for example, because they can actually consume it without having to deal with the hyperglycemia. So this is good, and also it's good for children, because it turns out that bacteria in our teeth that normally cause cavities cannot digest this honey either. So that means that they're not going to be there doing they're not going to be there doing cavities. So a couple of benefits of this trehalulose, and of course it's maybe a potential sugar that we can use in products. Why not chocolate made of stingless bee honey, right? And that would be all the you remove all the guilt from eating chocolate, because dark chocolate, of course, is very healthy already. So these other uses, for example, you can use it. So this comes from the Mayan knowledge, and they actually use it a lot for cataract prevention. So you can put it in your eyes. Because the pH of the honey is around 4, so it will be a little bit stitchy initially for like 5 to 10 seconds. It will make you cry, but when you open your eyes, it's like you had like a car wash, it's just really a different vision. You really feel it, that it thinned everything there. So and of course it prevents things like cataracts. So so that's been sort of proven in a way by many people that experienced it. And recently it actually also came under the hands of scientists from luxury brands like Chanel. They discovered that melipona honey had actually an enzyme that had rejuvenation effects. So you can now find these creams for lifting your skin, and it's based on melipona honey. So I, of course, don't have to buy Chanel. I can use my own honey and put it on me. So that's an advantage of being able to produce stingless bee honey. And the last advantage, I would say the last use as well, is the culinary uses, right? So we were just talking with Wendy, and I gave her some of my honey, and she tried it with cheese. And it's definitely a different experience. It's a honey that, the flavors, I've gone through a few. I went to the Honey Festival. I went through a few events here in California, and I get a lot of people actually saying, well, it's very floral, and it's definitely, you can feel the flowers. Some people say jasmine, some people say lavender, some people say fruity as well, grapes. And the fragrance of this honey is incredible. You can smell it from very far away. It's really incredible. So so there's this trend in Brazil right now where like chefs, 3-star Michelin chefs are actually using this honey. And you see here a picture of Alex Atala, which is a very known Brazilian chef. And he's actually written a book which has 67 recipes with stingless bee honey. So I have the PDF. If you're interested, I can share. Unfortunately, it's in Portuguese, but it's free. It's free download. So I'm happy to give you the link as well if you wanted to experience. And I'm sure you can do some of these recipes with honey from honeybees as well. So. And of course, I think Brazil and Mexico as well, because in Mexico they also have melipona honey. They have this chance of actually having all these different bee species, all these different honeys. And if you think about it, so with honeybees, we say, well, there's the floral, the monofloral honeys, right, like lavender and all that. But with stingless bee honey, you have 2 variants. You have the species of the bees, and then you have the floral. So you have multiple, combinations that can happen. So you can imagine all the flavors that can develop from that. So it's really, really, really a rich experience, and countries like Brazil, they're really taking advantage of that and saying, well, this is our biodiversity. How can we actually make it more available for people to try and to experience? So I also want to be able to have people from California and from the US to experience that. So that's why I'm also bringing some of this honey here. Okay, so let me see the time. So I have a little bit of time. So now I'm gonna talk about my master capstone project, because it also deals with stingless bees, and I want to show you how I actually ended up doing this, because it's also very interesting. So if you look at the map, this Plebeia emerina, which is a stingless bee from Brazil, has been found. This is an iNaturalist map, so it's mainly found in the southeastern Brazil, right? But there is a spot in California, and so why do we have these bees in California? So my project is about not really understanding why, because we know why, but actually my project is about helping those bees to find more homes, and maybe even to be managed by people in Palo Alto, for the reasons I was talking about, for educational reasons, and also to be able to have a new pollinator. I mean, they've actually found that they're excellent pollinators. So how can we help those bees there? So the objective really of my project is so I partner with a garden, a municipal garden there, the CAMBP garden. That's where most of those bees actually go and forage. And we're going to build a meliponary there for the public, and also for kids, for them to discover what are stingless bees and go and look for their house. And those bees, they only nest in tree cavities. And even though Palo Alto is a nice, a lot of trees there, it's still, they're still limited by the number of cavities they can find. So how can we help them actually have more space? So that's kind of the idea of the project, is to build this meliponary, to serve it as educational purposes, and to bring awareness to this new bee that is actually made residence in Palo Alto. So how did that happen? How do we have a Brazilian stingless bees in Palo Alto, you must wonder. So my first, when I was looking for something to do for my capstone project, I suddenly didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't work on stingless bees here, because of course they only occur in the tropics. But I wanted to see what I could do. So I started Googling things, right? And I think I Googled stingless bees, California, right? And I ended up with this article from Bay Nature that is written by Robin Agarwal, who's a resident of Palo Alto. And she tells a story about this colony of rare stingless bees that was presumed absent in California, and that was found by a 4-year-old in Palo Alto. And I was like, wow, what is that? So of course, the article was very essential for me, because I had all the names of all the people I needed to contact. And the first person I went to was Dr. Martin Hauser, who was at the CDFA. And Martin is actually, he's the head biosystematist, insect biosystematist at the CDFA. And he was a key piece for this story, right? Because he actually was the one who first described the species, and then the one to kind of put the story together. So here, these are some of his slides that he shared with me on his presentations. So here's the Plebeia, which is Plebeia emerina, let's say for now, Plebeia emerina, and this is a honeybee. So you see the difference of size, right? So they're quite different in size. The other thing too is that when when Martin actually first got the first specimen of these bees, it was back in 2013 from a resident of Palo Alto that had like a swarm of bees around his trees, and well, he thought they were wasps actually. So he actually called an insect exterminator, and the insect exterminator actually saw the bees, and he said, well, these are not wasps. These are something we don't know, and we're not going to kill them. We're going to send a sample to the State Department to see what it is. So they send them to Martin, and then he was like, well, I know, I mean, he knows about bees, and he's seen, works on stingless bees before, but he wasn't understanding how come there could be a Brazilian stingless bees in Palo Alto. So he was like, well, this is a joke. It's like, if you're telling me there is a kangaroo in my backyard, that doesn't make sense, right? So So he was very puzzled by that, but he did send the specimens around. And these are some of the other species that could be like, there's these other plebeias that could have been identified, but he wasn't able to really identify it right away. So he finally sent it to this Brazilian entomologist called Gabriel de Mello, and he identified them as Plebeia marina, which is a Plebeia marina. It's a stingless bee from Brazil, so at least he knew it, they were from Brazil. But from 2013 to for about 10 years, he didn't know why they were there. And finally, in 2021, Gabriel de Mello actually said, well, they're not really Plebeia marina, they're from Brazil, but they're a different species. This is a new species that we don't know of. So we cannot say that Plebeia marina anymore, we can just say Plebeia species. So, and this is a picture of the head. So this is the first tree actually where they were found in 2014. So you see in the picture, you see some little dots. These are the bees flying towards the tree. This is in Palo Alto, and this is the first tree where they were seen. But the tree fell in 20. Well, the tree fell over in 2020 during a storm. It died before, and so when the bees were there, they actually probably swarmed away, and all they can recoup was the nest. And this is a picture of the nest. And then this is the nest inside. So you can see some of the structures there with the honey and some of but the bees were basically not there anymore. So this was for me, I'm sad I wasn't there because this was the opportunity to actually put those bees in hive. But of course they didn't know that. So they let them go. And these are some of the wax structures as well that Martin still has that nest actually at the CDFA if you ever want to visit him. And this is the first site. So this is in Palo Alto, and Martin actually did a nice sort of investigation because he actually knows exactly where those bees were nesting initially. And this is actually in 2018. So this was from Richard Hayden. And this was the second nest that was discovered. This was discovered at the Gamble Garden. This is the garden I was talking about that is helping me with the project. And so after that, actually, there was a naturalist person who said, well, those bees are nice. We found a few nests, but let's set up a project to see where people actually see those bees. So they set up a project in naturalists called Brazilian Stingless bees in the San Francisco Bay Area. And people started taking shots of those different bees in different parts of the Palo Alto area. And actually, this is the project that allowed the mystery to be solved, because it ends up that a bee scientist, a bee geneticist from Baton Rouge, actually found some of those bees in our naturalist. And as he found them, he was reading some works, some previous sort of very obscure works from a Brazilian bee scientist. And that's where he discovered where those bees and how they were sent to California. And so they found, in the meantime, thanks to this project, they actually found a few additional nests in the Palo Alto neighborhood. But then he finally, thanks to this article, understood what was going on. So basically, this is a work from Paulo Nogueira Neto, which was he's kind of the father of stingless beekeeping in Brazil. And it turns out that in this article, he describes how in the 50s, he actually sent several colonies of stingless bees to the US to actually, it was actually a request from USDA to increase the pollinator diversity in the US, because they were getting worried that the honeybee was not going to be the only one pollinating all the different agricultural crops. So they had this project to actually bring different species of bees to the US, which today would be like super complicated to do, right? But at the time, there was a lot of those projects, exchanging material. So he did send them, and he sent them to several places. He sent them to Davis. Actually, he sent them to Palo Alto, to Stanford. He sent them to Baton Rouge, to Florida. And of course, none of them actually did well because of the weather, the flower sources and all that, right? So only the ones kept by this, this is a picture of Paulo Nogueira Neto, only the ones kept by this professor at Stanford called Professor George Schaffer actually made it. And Schaffer actually, so you can see here actually the description of what he did. So in 1948, I sent several colonies to the State Department of Agriculture, et cetera, and he actually described the species that he sent to Dr. Schaffer, which is a plebeian species. So he doesn't give he doesn't give the species, right? Only the genera, which indicates that that's probably a new species. And so, and he also said that he lived for 8 years with this Palo Alto professor. And then he goes on to say that the other colonies died. He has 1 year, and then that he will also send them to Portugal, et cetera, but only the one with Dr. Schaffer in Palo Alto made it for 8 years. But unfortunately, Dr. Schaffer actually passed away in 1962. And after his pass, nobody heard about those bees anymore. And it was only in 2013 when those people called for a wasp nest that those bees started to be seen again. So this is Martin's investigation about Schaffer's house, and you can see the colonies that were found. So you can see the first one on red, and then the subsequent ones. And so there was actually a big project as well that Martin started to actually have people see if they could find additional colonies. But for many years, nobody could find any colonies. So until 2021, where this 4-year-old called Annika or Arnott, who was actually just learning about insects with her caregiver, Taj Lindsay, she actually found 2 additional colonies in Palo Alto. And so that's where the article from Robin comes from, well, this 4-year-old. And actually this made television, news in television. There is a CBS document, news report that you can also find online that tells the whole story about what happened there. So yeah, it's a very fascinating story from the get-go. So I'm actually only trying to add a little bit more to the story by trying to keep those bees in hives and actually use them for educational purposes. So that's my project. And so here is basically all the colonies that we know of. So what we did for the project is that we actually, so the project deals with, first of all, community and sort of citizen science approach. And so what we did is that what we're going to do is that we're going to place different hive lures or like bee lures around the Palo Alto neighborhood, and hoping that they will actually swarm in those lures, and then we'll transfer those nests into real wooden boxes, wooden hives, and then we'll place them in a meliponary. So I'm sure the question you might have is that an invasive pest or a new pollinator? And actually, it's actually very, very good that we that we actually have the CDFA guy, Martin Hauser, actually deals with all the invasive pests that get into California every single day. So he has, I think his perspective is very crucial here. And of course, for him, this is not an invasive pest, right? This is an introduced species, but it's actually a beneficial introduced species, right? Because it actually goes and pollinates all the flowers. It's not doing any harm to any other bees. It's just doing its business. It's actually hasn't expanded more than this, right? So from 1950 to 2021, this is as far as it's gone. We haven't reported those bees anywhere else. So it's really, really, really not being, we cannot say that this is an invasive pest, right? Of course. So this is and it's a very special case because, as I said, this is the only case of stingless bees in the Northern Hemisphere. And it's a case of survival for this species, resilience as well, because you can imagine that this bees is not very used to having the weather patterns that we have in Palo Alto. And it's probably just adapted. And one thing that Martin is right about is he thinks that the whole environment of Palo Alto, with all the the posh neighborhoods, the nice flower irrigated gardens, have actually made this bee to really like, rich people basically. And thanks to all these nice posh gardens, these bees have been able to find the food they need. So that's one of the reasons they were able to survive in that environment. So these are some pictures of the first workshop that we did for my project. So this was actually exactly a month ago. So celebrating the 1 month anniversary of my capstone. And you can see here, Anika, actually, she came to the workshop. She's now much taller now. She's 6 now, and but she was very happy. These are the all the different bee lures that we've placed. We've placed about 40 lures around people's homes. So during this workshop, I had the chance to give them a little bit of a Stingless Bee 101, and while we were doing that, and they placed all the lures, and we're waiting for those bees to swarm, and hopefully one, we only need one to start. So hopefully one of them will be the happy one, and we'll be able to transfer those into a beehive. And this is Annie Klein. She's actually the manager of the community gardens there. She's actually from Brazil. So this is a very special project for her as well. And she's put some of the lures as well in the community gardens. And so what's supposed to happen, so you see that in the picture on the right. So the bees are supposed to get there, enter. They will, of course, first scout. If they like it, they will enter, bring a queen. The queen will start laying, they will build a colony, and then after the colony is well established, we'll be able to transfer that colony into a permanent hive. So hopefully, it will happen before the end of the summer, because of course, the weather, I think, will not be very conducive to them in the winter, right? So that's a difference from Brazil, where it doesn't get that cold in the winter. And if you happen to live around the Palo Alto area and you want to help with the project, well, there's another way you can do that. You can plant flowers for those bees. So from the iNaturalist project, we actually know exactly what are the flowers they like. So this is a list of all the flowers. They like this bulbine, they like the Hebes, they like the Veronicas. So all these different species that can be planted. And so we're through the garden, the Gambo garden, we're also putting a lot of those flowers as well. And as I said, you can if you go to the Palo Alto area, go to the Gambo garden, you'll see them right now. They're very active right now. So they're pollinating and doing a lot. They're so small that you really need to look hard, but if you're an iNaturalist expert, you will be able to take a few photos, and then you can put them in the project of the that specialize in those bees in iNaturalist. Okay, well, I think I'm done. I hope I gave you enough information, but if not, just send me an email. I'm happy to answer questions, and I also have my Instagram, arimu_bee, where I post regularly about stingless bees, and I will post about this project, and very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Jean-Philippe, for your generosity of time and knowledge about stingless bees. I learned a lot. One thing I do have a question about is, are stingless bee populations suffering from any kinds of mites or diseases similar to Apis mellifera? I was just curious about that. If you have to mitigate for anything like that.
Yeah, fortunately, so far, they're free of mites. So we don't have that problem. There is a problem with small flies that are called phorids, and they actually go into weak hives, and they will lay their eggs into inside the pods there, and the larvae can actually destroy a whole hive in 3 days, because they will just multiply so fast, and they will just eat everything that they find, and they will just literally liquefy the hive. So these are big problems. And actually, the other problem is black soldier fly. So black soldier fly, the fly that people like to grow for the larvae, for the protein. They actually they also like to lay their eggs, in those cracks between the two brood boxes, and those larvae will also be very bad for stingless bees. So, but again, if you keep your hive strong and happy, that shouldn't happen.
Okay, thank you. It's moving on to, we've got 2 minutes left. There's one question here. To what extent are Apis mellifera outcompeting Melipony? Do you believe that we have lost many Melipony species since the introduction of Apis mellifera?
So there's different perspectives. There definitely, when there is a competition for floral sources, there could be a problem with Apis mellifera. But I would say, you know, these bees are very specialized into small flowers, into like forest trees that that normally Apis mellifera doesn't go to, you know.
Got it. And how do
So
you how are
yeah.
how is a queen determined?
Okay, good question. The queen, so it depends, right? So you saw how I talked about the two groups. So the Meliponas and the Trigonas have different strategies. The Meliponas, they actually will lay 25% of their eggs will be females that will become princesses. So 25% can potentially become queens. So they will select one of those. If the queen, for example, dies, they will select just one of them to become the queen, and then that will happen. So for Trigonas, they will have a queen cell that will be bigger, and then they will feed them more, and that will become the queen. So a little bit different ways of doing it.
All right, thank you. We will definitely include your contact information, because I'm sure there are some people here who would love to reach out to you, perhaps, and even offer some space if you ever have enough hives that you want to distribute throughout Southern California. So yeah. And we are so grateful for you sharing your knowledge with us this evening, Jean-Philippe. And in good time, we're right at the top of the hour. So thank you for respecting everyone's time. And we thank you, everybody here on this lecture, for the generosity of your time and your interest on World Environment Day about stingless bees. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for being here, and I hope you learned something, and I hope we'll get stingless bees in California at one point on hives. I mean, we already have them in the trees, but hopefully we'll get them in hives.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.